Sweater. Jeff's a publisher of Africa Agribusiness Magazine. He's based out of the Chicago metro area. He's had a long experience in agriculture and the commodities side of the business. He worked as a grain trader at the Board of Trade. He founded the magazine Africa Agribusiness with the idea of helping smallholder farmers in Africa increase both their yields and incomes through improved planting and the ability to eliminate post-harvest losses. So he's focusing on success stories in the magazine, both big and small, commercial scale, smallholder enterprises too, and looks at some of the issues why foreign companies and individuals should be thinking about business in the agriculture sector in Africa. As somebody who is an interested observer of trends in agricultural business in Africa, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. Jeff, thank you for coming down and being with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I first wanted to thank everyone who put this first business conference together. I know how difficult it is when you're starting something new, and it's a very impressive turnout. I'm actually kind of jealous. I started a series called The Next Generation of African Hunger Fighters about 6 months ago with a partner who's from the nonprofit world, from the Global Youth Innovation Network, and we did our first one at Howard University. We had 80 scheduled to attend, and we had about 45 that actually showed up. So it's not a simple process, and I appreciate everything they've done. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Chacha for many things. One, a great presentation that she gave. Second, a great initiative because women do the majority of work in Africa when it comes to agriculture. In fact, I think the numbers vary from 70 to 75%. I have a feeling it's more like 85 to 90% of the actual work being done. So congratulations to her. They also talked about the long trip here. She actually came from Tanzania. I went all the way from Chicago. I kind of made that long trip from Chicago too, so I'm not sure why we got credited for a long trip here. But so as he briefly mentioned, my passion really is in commodities, my commodities background. So from that relationship, what I got, I used to trade on the floor. When I got off the floor, I would travel throughout the Midwest to give hedging seminars to U.S. farmers, sometimes 15 farmers, sometimes associations with 100 farmers. And the idea, I would have an idea of how much they should sell at harvest and how much to store. I actually wanted to get back into commodities about 3 years ago. And when I did that, what I realized from my trips to Africa in the meantime, and also friends in the market, is that what I used to do in the U.S. became somewhat irrelevant. They have large farms. Farmers are relatively wealthy now compared to prices that they used to have. So my advice and commodity background really fits more in Africa. Now, obviously, we have a lot of work to do before we talk about long-term commodities. So my first passion really is post-harvest losses through grain storage. Once we eliminate the grain storage issues, it sets up a whole new business model and opportunities for youth. Because if youth does not see agriculture as a business opportunity and continue to see it as subsistence, what we're going to get is a situation where we not only stay the same, we're going to move backwards. In the meantime, if they see it as a true business opportunity, and that's why I'm so happy to be able to speak in front of a young group of very impressive MBA students who are looking for business opportunities in Africa. And they are there. As he had mentioned, there's enough Western media that talks about the negatives of Africa. We try to focus on the positives. So we'll come up with different versions of how basically post-harvest losses can start processes, how processing on the ground can take what opportunities, many that Mr. Chacha mentioned, where the women farmers basically are not getting the price that they can get for their grains. So between the combination of numbers, co-ops, putting numbers in action, they can get a much better price for their crops. If we can go another step further from there, then we can talk about processing. So instead of actually shipping the natural resources out of the country where everyone else is making money. We can have processing plants and have a finished product. And now we set up a whole new business model for kind of young entrepreneurs to be able to do. Again, moving forward, again, I apologize for, I didn't do a PowerPoint presentation, so I have to look at the notes occasionally. But with 50% of the world's people are less than 25 years old, nearly 50% of all people right now that are young live in poverty, and 90% of those youth are living in developing countries. In places like Sub-Saharan Africa and Sudan, 40% of the people are younger than 15 years old. So again, if we don't reach this market in terms of youth, we're only going to go backwards. I also am going to do something, I'm going to be very brief, a few more minutes, but I want to do a question and answer period because from my perspective, I can give a couple ideas in terms of what we're doing, but the question and answer is really what they asked me to do is give ideas as to business opportunities. And I think those things can come from questions and answers from the panel itself. So I'll speak for a few more minutes and then open it up to the question and answer period. As I found through our Next Generation series, the best events are ones where the audience participates and eventually basically there's 45 minutes to an hour of questions. So hopefully we'll have 10 or 15 minutes before I'm cut off in terms of my time frame, and then I know there's about another 20 minutes or 30 minutes at the end of the session. Again, from a commodity standpoint, once we solve our issues with post-harvest losses, which obviously is a very, very difficult thing to do, what I see going more forward is commodity markets all over, commodity exchanges, I should say, throughout Africa. And when people start to look not at the current situation, but at 3, 6, 9 months, kind of like we do from the US model, we can start to use price differences. So not only can we pay the locals and the farmers more than they're getting from the local producers, because now we have storage facilities, we now have a real commodity. And from a bank perspective, we now have something that they can actually lend against. So they have, warehouse receipts are becoming more normal in Africa, and as we continue to expand, now we know that that's a value. From a commodity standpoint, we know we can offer them a larger profit and pay them more money from the smaller, because from a commodity market, we know that when everyone sells at the same time at harvest, the price is the lowest. And if we have that ability to hold on to that grain, in most cases, within 60 to 90 days, depending on the season, that price will actually double. So that's when basically we're going to be able to take advantage, sell at a higher price, and be able to pay the smallers more than they're currently getting. I'll go into a couple things in terms of my problems with what the U.S. does in Africa, and also I'll mention China as well and a couple other specific African countries. But many U.S. firms have pushed for large-scale production and the use of very expensive equipment, which requires modern technology. The majority of farmers in Africa, as many of you probably already know, is smallholder farmers. They make up a huge percentage of the farmers. So for the U.S. to say this is the way to do it and not ask the questions to the people who are the majority of farmers, to me is wrong. So what we have to realize is that there are some avenues and things that make sense for commercial large-scale farming, but the actual equipment that works is not $100,000 combines with electric things where you have to check the computer chip in it. With all the electricity issues that will come up, it just doesn't make sense. There's actually equipment from 70s and 80s, John Deere equipment, for example, that is used machinery. This will double and triple yields in Africa right now, and it actually fits the model a lot better than the current larger equipment. There's also some things, like I said, we all learn from each other. So I know Professor Madhu, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, Viswandu, made a great presentation earlier. And he mentioned the ideas of India being his first country, America being the second country, and Africa being his third country. We definitely can learn from other countries in terms of Africa. India has done some great things in terms of video production. I actually ran into someone just before I started speaking. She's doing a similar thing, but I don't know if any of you are familiar with Rikin Gandhi from Digital Green. Basically, they produce videos, successful playing techniques in the local language in India, and these are distributed. So anyone basically can view these videos for free, and they get the idea of someone not from them telling how to do it. It's video in the local language, and in most cases, they're within a close vicinity. So it's kind of like learning from their own. And what they realize is that the cost to do this is about 10% of actually sending some out in the field. So they can be viewed anytime. They have a 1-800 number that they're able to follow up with, and they can actually monitor how many people implement the new planning strategies. This is going to be huge in Africa. He's actually just getting started. Right now he has a project in Ghana and Ethiopia, but it will continue to expand with the expansion of everything that we talk about, from mobile technology and phones. Now, willing people will be able to video in their local language in Africa exactly the proper planning techniques, and hopefully be able to take advantage of that. I'm also going to give some examples, as they asked me, of countries in Africa and kind of specific examples of some opportunities. We've done some work with Sierra Leone. I had a chance in the magazine to interview President Krom and also their Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Sam Sese. So I'm going to use Sierra Leone for some of the examples. Some of the things that you'll find in the, and you also find these in the majority of most sub-Saharan African countries. So life expectancy, which the good news is has gone up in Sierra Leone in the last 7 years. But if from a life expectancy, I have about 2 years to live. So the average expectancy right now is still only 48 years of age, which is a pretty scary number to me. 89% of arable land is in mint condition, something we can't really fathom from a U.S. perspective, where land is so cultivated. So 89% of the arable land has never been touched. So there's huge potential. We talk about feeding the world. Africa can feed the world. There's just a lot of work that needs to be done from that perspective. Agriculture in Sierra Leone represents 46% of their GDP, so a huge number. It also represents 75% of their labor force, which is a very similar number in most African countries. Their major commodities are rice, cassava, vegetable, oil palm, groundnuts, fruits, and sugarcane. Their main meat production in Sierra Leone is poultry, cattle, sheep, and pigs. Sierra Leone is abundant in fish, which is really the only protein source for 80% of the population, and employs over 500,000 people in Sierra Leone. So for young people, there are great potentials for export opportunities within the fishing market in Sierra Leone, if that's something that someone has an interest in. There's also a future for processing, again, in Sierra Leone, and value-added services that come with that. So not just the fish themselves, but many value-added services. Another potential for young people is sugarcane, not necessarily just in Sierra Leone, but all throughout Africa. 4 out of the 5 world's largest producers of sugarcane, the EU, US, China, and India, all have switched from being sugarcane producers to being sugarcane importers. So there's a huge market throughout the world for sugarcane. Palm oil also is a future potential opportunity. The palm oil itself can be used for biodiesel. It also represents a good opportunity as the world consumption of edible oils is rising, and at the same time, the world production is decreasing. Ethiopia is a market that has made major changes, and you'll hear about probably 5 to 6 African countries that have made major changes. Ethiopia is a population of over 80 million people. It's one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. Agriculture accounts for 45% of their GDP, and it is responsible for 90% of its exports. So there's huge potential and change there. The government of Ethiopia has also started to make changes. They implemented a program that's called AGP, it stands for Agriculture Growth Program, and its basic objective is to increase agricultural productivity and market access for key crop and livestock products in target areas with the increased participation of women and youth. We've also done some projects. The Ethiopian government did a project with DuPont, which we actually did an article with, which they are increasing by hybrid maize seeds, they're increasing the production and yields of the farmers in Ethiopia. I have a couple more minutes, and then, like I said, hopefully I can open it up to questions and get some more answers. Again, we talk about potential in Africa. People tend to group Africa together. There are many, many different countries, many different situations. It'd be hard to talk about Africa and not talk about Nigeria. So I'm going to basically play the politician. In the magazine, we talk about success stories. So I'm not going to talk about the negatives in Nigeria. Obviously, with 170 million people, there certainly is a huge market there. My positive for Nigeria is that they have a new minister who is very educated and very understands the importance of agriculture. So Nigeria is kind of making a transformation from oil money, basically, to agriculture, which they for many years let go. And he has made a huge difference. His name is Ken Adesina, for those not familiar with him. He's the Minister of Agriculture. He was just recently named the Forbes Business Person of the Year in Africa. And they have started to work and understand and purchase large silos, large storage facilities. So the Nigeria future is bright when it comes to agriculture. They have recently purchased $6 million worth of storage facilities. It's a relatively small company, so many have not heard of it, but it's named Bloomberg Grain. So they build a large storage facilities, which is kind of the new modern technology. It does everything, basically. It keeps everything fresh from the technology, basically, from fruits, vegetables, onions, for long periods of times. It will be able to access what's missing, what's not, what needs to be replenished. It knows exactly where everything's going. So they've created a lot of jobs throughout Nigeria, and it's been very well received. And I see that happening all throughout Africa in terms of these large storage facilities. China is also an interesting conversation, which always will come up when we talk about Africa. People have many, many different views. China itself is bringing infrastructure, and they're doing work in Africa. I actually got the chance to interview former President Obasanjo about 2 years ago, actually at the Kellogg Africa Conference. And the first thing he said is, Jeff, don't talk bad about China until the U.S. has something better to offer. That's one perspective. But lately, the China perspective has not been very good for Africa in terms of they bring their own workers. So when they do a project, they'll do the infrastructure. Not only will they bring their own projects, but some of the people that they're bringing are actually Chinese prisoners that actually are getting their sentences reduced. So it's a very scary concept. So it sounds good in terms of what they're building, but they're not employing the locals, they're not getting involved at all. So right now, I would call that a negative. I do agree we need to offer better alternatives and better solutions from the U.S., but that's not a good subject when we can't employ locals and the use. Some of the positives that are coming out, and again, we talk about many different things. Obviously, we deal with the U.S. perspective probably more than most, being from the U.S. But there are many, we're starting to see a lot more agro-dealers throughout Africa. They're aimed at improving incomes and productivity by increasing the smallholder access to improve agriculture inputs, especially seeds and better production, better practices, the strengthening of rural agro-dealers. They build a strong network of agro-dealers, which strengthens the overall agriculture sector of a country as the enterprises become centers for input, supply, equipment, purchase, training, and the agriculture best practices. The dealers will become certified, and they have completed a rigorous 6-module inventory control, both in sales and marketing, record keeping, managing the business relationships, and the agro-dealers also receive ongoing technical assistance in inputs and ag equipment, and access to working capital and trade credit through trade guarantees. Some of the business opportunities, and I'll lead into question and answers after this because this is kind of the bringing up. There are many opportunities from the U.S. to Africa. They definitely exist here for MBA students here and also throughout the U.S. If you can find basically what works in your home country in terms of what has a an excess and what works in Africa and what works as the U.S. and also vice versa, what would work. A close friend of mine works, he represents the state of Maryland to Africa, specifically Lagos, Nigeria, and they've closed 15 transactions within the last year, working with those Maryland businesses, figuring out what works going towards Africa and Africa to the U.S. And that actually is a great business opportunity. There's been many funds that have been cut within the states themselves in terms of working with Africa itself. So the opportunities are, those funds have been cut, but the states themselves, which you can approach very openly, are open to the idea of you being a business person and actually being paid on a per transaction basis as opposed to a salary, working with those companies to try to figure out things in your home country. So at that, I'll leave it pretty much to question and answer, and hopefully I'll be able to give some advice or some more ideas specifically about commodities themselves and how that works in Africa going forward.
In terms of how to develop a model that will impact agricultural output in the largest, in terms of developing a model that will create the largest impact in the shortest period of time for African producers, there's been a lot written about commercial scale farms with outgrower models, or nucleus farms with outgrower models. Can you cite some successful examples of that that have been in existence more than 2, 3, or 4 years?
Well, there really have not, from a 3 or 4 year period, they're not. Right now, what I recommend and what's going to happen more and more is separate from smallholder farmers is certain land where we're able to actually have that land and do a basically scaled project. So it starts out as a scaled and then it's basically replicated to a large source. So there definitely is a market for the commercialization, and that's certainly open. The problem is when you try to take over that market and kind of exclude smallholder farmers. So to me, they're totally separate issues. There hasn't been, that I know of, successful projects from that 3 or 4 year time period where it's been large. But that's what you're eventually going to see is basically that successful model from commercialization, and then it'll be replicated throughout Africa. And again, I didn't really talk about the specifics of knowing where you're going. There's such a huge difference between doing business in. So one of the more important things in terms of investments is making sure that the country you're looking to start a new project in is open to that project, and you're able to work with not only the private sector, but also have the blessing of the government, because that's where a lot of people have gotten into trouble with starting projects, and then they have so much interference that it becomes very difficult to sustain. So you have to kind of work with the private government sector and then show them the opportunities through these scaled projects, and then hopefully take it from there.
Please give your name. That was Mr. Otto, an equipment exporter, speaking. One thing to add on that, Wilmer, a very successful outgrower scheme in southern Sierra Leone is the Gold Tree Palm Oil Company. They received $30 million of funding from FinFund recently. They work with thousands of outgrowers. They right now buy palm heads on the open market at their mill. They press it, they export the oil. Most of their oil is going into Guinea. And there's other examples in Ghana. Similarly, there's a Norwegian investment that works with outgrowers in the palm sector in Ghana that I'm familiar with. But I think there are many examples, but the most successful ones to me that I've seen have really strong management at the core with the processing and the operations, whether it's maize or something like oil palm.
Prosper Bami. I have a question or a comment to ask about Chinese growing in Africa. I originally come from a country where actually there is plenty of Chinese doing whatever. You know, even a small economy activity which should be done by local people and done by Chinese. I think there is a reason why this is happening, and through your presentation, we can very quickly get some. I originally coming from Democratic Republic of Congo, and through the presentation, I learned that most of the interaction that America has is with English countries in Africa. We talk Nigeria, we talk Ethiopia, we talk. This is understandable. My question was, what can be done in way to drop this barrier? There is a problem. What can be done? Because during this presentation, just to the picture, the small, the poverty in Africa and what is happening in a big town like Joburg. This is not good. So if we let some countries, because they don't speak English, where they are with the trouble.
That's a great question. I'll try to answer it, and there might be something that I can actually answer better, as I don't speak French. But actually, I don't think they're not represented. Like I said, I might not be the best person to answer that question. We deal with many French-speaking countries from the magazine perspective, but in terms of investments, it does get difficult, even from my perspective. When we do an interview, we always have a translator, and there's definitely some translation and kind of some things that can be lost in the translation. So I might not be the best person to answer that. I don't know if there's someone in the room who would like to take a shot at that one. Kano?
Yeah, well, I'm francophones, but I don't know if that helps. But American businesses are very active in francophone countries too. Look at AES has been a major investor in Cameroon. Sorry, AES just invested its interest in Cameroon to Actis, I believe, which is a European, British private equity firm. That American investments are very large in francophone areas. You look at Contour Global, the investor in Togo, a power facility there, also in Senegal, in Rwanda, which is making the transition from being francophone to an anglophone country. You're going to also look at the oil companies, mining companies. So I don't think, if you would, that American companies are ignoring francophone countries. But I think also you have to look at the demographics. Many of the francophone countries, you have smaller populations, larger geographical areas. It's harder to do business in that kind of structure as, say, for example, to Nigeria, where you have a more concentrated population. And I think, I believe, that the language barriers have been a problem in the past, but not so much now, because the language business, very much for the commerçants, the business people, is English and French. And so you're seeing more and more of that. And if there's a market, I'm pretty sure that American companies are fine.
Let's take one last brief question, and then Jeff can address that, and we'll have a break.
My name is Oye Kale. I don't know if I should introduce myself when I'm that. Some wouldn't want me to, so I'm glad to be here, but the question is for Mr. Vosela. Am I pronouncing that right? Okay. Actually, it's more than a question, it's a comment about what you said. I think there's a challenge for all the young Africans that are here today that are sponsoring this program. There's a mighty challenge for you in Africa. If Dr. Professor Ilesami Adeshina, who is the Vice Chancellor at the University of Illinois, University of Illinois is one of the best universities in the world. If a Nigerian, an African is the Vice Chancellor here, can you picture what, I will use the wrong word, can you picture what he could be doing in Africa today? And I don't know him personally, but I've been to one of his lectures where he said he graduated here, went back to Nigeria to work. The atmosphere was not proper, so he left. Now, the United States is using the best of this, one of the brightest people I've ever run into. Now, you're telling me now that Chinese are using their prisoners to work in Africa. I think your first job should be to get them out. I would rather have Africa not civilized than to have citizens of another country to come and work there. Now, I'll say this though, please do not find United States good enough for you to stay rather than go home. I am one of those that are guilty. I went to school here, went back home. Home was not suitable in these quotations. I came back here. I'm now retired, and I don't know what I'm doing here because young people like you with this kind of program in hand can really make a difference. Now I have a challenge. I have an assignment for you all. I used to be a teacher. Can you please write this down? Mr. Vosella, I'm going to talk to you after this because this is a question for you of something maybe you can do. Can you please all write this down? It's LADOL. LADOL. You can go Google what company that is in Nigeria. Ladol introduced one of the biggest companies in the world into Africa. That big company is Samsung. S-A-M, do I need to spell that? Ladol introduced Samsung to Africa, to Nigeria. Can bring to Nigeria. Go find this out firsthand. And if I'm wrong, I'd like to hear from you because I know I'm not wrong. But the question is, how do you take care of this sort of thing? How do you prevent companies coming to Africa and then the Europeans, the Indians, now the Chinese prisoners are taking over from Africa?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I believe the answer, and I totally agree. I mean, we talk about the youth in Africa and the unemployment rate being so high. So the idea of someone coming in basically dictating terms, bringing their own people in, certainly is not helping the local economy and youth unemployment. So I agree that has to change. But from perspective, we have to offer better opportunities and better solutions in Africa ourselves. So the U.S. is kind of guilty of sometimes putting too many restrictions on, and there has to be a happy medium there somewhere between China with no restrictions and bringing their own people in, and what the U.S. is offering. So I think we need to do a better job of offering opportunities, but not putting quite so many restrictions on. So obviously, in a perfect world, Africa would rather deal with the U.S. than China. But the truth is, we haven't really stepped up to the plate and offered our assistance and investment the same way. Obviously, there's a different business model. From a commodities background, the U.S. doesn't see Africa the same way. China has a vested interest in Africa for itself. They have a lot of mouths to feed. The reason they're in Africa is because of commodities and the natural resources. The U.S. doesn't have a problem feeding itself, so they see it from a different business model. But as things change and accountability changes, political stability changes, then we're going to get large U.S. investment, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of dictate terms more where we can make a better offer to the countries in Africa, Nigeria, for example, and they will decide basically that they will not allow China in bringing their own people. China is more than welcome to bring infrastructure and do things, but it should be on Africa's terms, not China's terms.
I think we're going to wrap up now. Let's please give Mr. Vosler